Hello, everyone. Today I'll be talking about my project, Q&A Buddy, that I've been working on for winter 2023. My project is centered around helping TAs becoming more effective help givers in office hours. TAs often have some goals, for example, helping students develop critical thinking or problem-solving skills. At the same time, they might also have certain beliefs. For example, they might feel like they're letting the students down if the student is unsure. This belief might lead them to pursue strategies that, for example, removing any instance of the unsureness in their office hours, which then leads them to take certain actions like staying to answer every question a student has or walking students step by step through an assignment until they reach the solution. And then this might lead to certain outcomes which might not necessarily be in alignment with the goals. For example, if the goal is to help students develop problem solving skills, then walking students through, to the solution might not let them practice or develop these skills. Existing approaches are usually focused on the strategies and actions that TAs can take. So think, for example, TA training programs or TA handbooks, right? They're often geared towards teaching TAs like, oh, these are good strategies that you should use in office hours. But if the belief of the TA is still, in conflict with the goal, then what we see is that the TAs might learn about these strategies, yes, but in office hours, they tend to take the strategies that are in alignment with their belief and therefore not in alignment with the goals. So my project is about helping TAs find alignment. The entire of the blue part, we want it to be green in alignment with the TA's own goal. And the first part of this involves changing, the TA's own belief over to green. Now, why is this hard? For one, beliefs are implicitly held, right? No one goes around saying that I think I'm a bad TA if my students are unsure. It's just something that's, exists. We think that way. We don't say it. And but to be able to find areas of misalignment, you do have to articulate or be aware that, you're holding these beliefs. And one way of doing that is through reflection, but TAs might not be familiar or proficient with reflection. But let's say we could get over it, and like our this project's conceptual approach is to scaffold the reflection process for the TA. Even then, it's still hard for a TA to adopt new strategies and actions, and to get to the outcome because TAs might not be sure on how to adopt this new approach. Like, okay, great. Now I've adopted a new belief, but what do I do in office hours? And also, learning something new takes up mental bandwidth. Um, Office hours also take up mental bandwidth, right? TAs have to talk to students, engage them, maybe demonstrate some certain debugging techniques. So it's not clear if TAs are able to pursue this new approach during office hours, given how taxing mentally both of these are, especially when the new approach to be learned is complex. What do I mean by complex? So let's think about like what goes into adopting a new strategy. Let's say, the goal is to help students develop critical thinking skills, and the strategy is to give students just enough help so they can practice critical thinking as much as possible. One skill might be that, we want to ensure students practice skills that they are able to. But this relies on the T being able to assess the student. So, for example, assessing the student's level of proficiency and identifying the specific blocker that's preventing the student from moving on, because that's what we want to target. Another skill might also be to use the student's understanding to decide how much help we want to give them. But this also involves assessing, students' level of proficiency, identifying blockers. Yet another skill might be to help students articulate their understanding. Is it the concept they don't understand? Is it that they don't know the debugging approach? Is it that they've used the debugging approach, but they can't make sense of the output? So that's really what I mean when I say that, this new strategy of giving students just enough help is complex. It's made up of many different sub skills, so to speak, some of which are applicable in certain situations. And as a novice who's just decided to adopt this new strategy, it is very overwhelming to learn all these at the same time. So my project's conceptual approach is to break down a strategy into many different sub skills and have TAs practice them individually, build proficiency in them one by one, so that they can eventually piece it back together to be able to adopt this strategy of giving students just enough help. So over this quarter, I've run a couple of studies with prototypes, and the two main parts are scaffolding reflection. in which I asked the question, can we build a system that helps TAs reflect and identify conflicts between their goals, beliefs, and actions? And the second part on picking up new practices, where I asked if we can build a system that helps them adopt new approaches and put that into practice during office hours. So the first part for reflection, remember I said that TAs were not necessarily proficient or familiar with reflection. So my prototype aims to break down the process and lead them through it step by step. For example, on this tab, all we ask the TA to do is to pick a goal that most resonates with them. And you'll see at the bottom, there are many different tabs. That's okay. We'll lead the TA through this step by step, prevent them from being overwhelmed by too many things at once. Another thing that we said was that goals and beliefs might be implicitly held. It's hard to articulate them. So our design it presents the goals and beliefs to the TAs so they don't need to come up with them. And this is grounded in theory that recognition is easier than recall. So if we put it out there and say like, hey, do any of these resonate with you? It's much easier than having the TA dig into their own psyche to be able to come up with a belief like that. After they pick their goals and beliefs, we do ask them what kinds of actions they tend to take. We give them a checklist and they can check off actions that they find themselves taking. And then we use visual juxtaposition to help TAs draw links between related concepts. That's just a fancy way of saying that we put related concepts near to each other side by side. For example, we want the TAs to realize why the beliefs they have lead them to take certain actions. So we'll put them side by side so it's easy for the TA to refer back and forth and think about it. Here's another example. Let's say the TA's goal is to help students become independent learners. And the action they picked was that they would walk students through the problem step by step until a solution was reached. When you put it like that, side by side, it's pretty clear that helping students become independent learners and then walking them through the problem step by step kind of misaligned. But it's not clear that it is misaligned if you just throw it to the T and say, here, reflect. And that's why our prototype makes use of these putting things near to help TAs think through the problem. Here's another example. Once they've gone through the previous reflection, then we ask them whether the goals and the beliefs are aligned or misaligned. So for the evaluation, we wanted to see if the prototype helped TAs recognize conflicts between their goals, beliefs, and actions, and in what ways it succeeded or failed. I had 4 TAs use the prototype. Some of them used an earlier version of it. And mainly I was just observing the reactions and examining the responses. So I found that TAs are generally able to think critically about areas of misalignment. For example, this TA picked a couple of actions here on the left and a goal on the right, which was helping students gain confidence in their programming skills. And they were actually able to come up with the center part and realize that these actions don't build confidence because in their own words, when providing the scaffolding, students don't need confidence because they can just ask the TA. And this TA went on to say that if they ask an expert and come to a solution, it means the student didn't come up with it themselves, and that builds the idea that students can solve problems without an expert's help, which is bad for confidence. And then when this TA moved on to examine, the relationship between his beliefs and goals, he said that the belief was misaligned with confidence because the state of struggling and then being unsure and then fixing and overcoming it is what builds confidence in students. But if the TA keeps providing scaffolding and leads the student and keeps telling them the next steps, then they don't have to do it alone. They don't have the experience of overcoming the struggles, which is misaligned with helping the students gain confidence. So we sought to understand what worked, and it seemed like providing the structure for reflection was helpful for TAs. I put a couple quotes here on the slides where TAs said generally they liked the process, and how we could ask them questions one at a time, and also that juxtaposition seems to have helped TAs. So when they were filling it out, I was observing them, and when we place things on the same slides, they typically look back and forth, seeming to indicate that they were trying to draw links between these. And also another quote from a TA who said that the side-by-side format made it easier to link up ideas and compare them. So it seems that with a structure to scaffold reflection, TAs are able to critically assess, whether their goals, beliefs, and actions are aligned. So a couple limitations here. It's a really small sample size. I tested with 4 people, and also we had a small database of beliefs. It was 5. And it's not clear if, with these 5 beliefs, we can help many or most TAs engage in reflection, or if even, whether people's beliefs can be stuffed nicely into a database. So that's something to work on next. And I think the next steps are more testing. It'll get at both these limitations, increase the sample size, and also we'll see if things are going wrong with more users, whether this database is unable to handle, more kinds of users. Okay, so at this point, let's say, a TA has used the prototype and they have come to the conclusion that their old beliefs is slightly misaligned with their goal. In changing their actual behavior, what might be hard? For one, they might not be sure concretely what new actions to take. And also, we're not sure if they can actively practice these new actions during office hours because of the mental bandwidth issue. So, um, if they're not sure how to get started, we will build up to suggesting actions to the TAs. But first, we want to ensure alignment. So we'll first suggest an alternative belief and ask the TA if that's aligned with the goal. So I have an example here on the slide where just the TA wants to help students improve problem solving and critical thinking skills. They had their old belief, and we make a suggestion to them. And then if they agree with the belief, we'll suggest an approach. So there are 3 suggestions here, and this TA picked, giving students just enough help. He thought that it was an approach that aligned well with this alternative belief and would help him get at his goal. And then after they pick that, we suggest specific strategies and actions that are part of giving students just enough help. For example, checking in with the students, down to the specific actions of like what sentences to say, what questions to ask. And we're hoping that this gives TAs an idea of things that they can do that are aligned with giving students just enough help. As for the other obstacle where the TAs can't spare mental bandwidth while talking to students, our design engages the TA to reflect during office hours, but in between students. So the way it works is that after they talk to each student, when they're moving to the next student, they'll just take a quick 20 seconds to rate themselves on how well they did in applying the new strategy. And the idea or the hope is that in doing this rating, the TA will be made to reflect on how well they did. If they did well, that's great. If they didn't, it would make them more cognizant of the actions, more aware, and hopefully practice it more. So for the evaluations, we really wanted to understand if they're able to start practicing these actions and if the prototype engages them in the mini reflection moments, and whether that allows them to take actions in line with their new approach. I tested this with 2 TAs across 2 weeks. And the first finding was that providing concrete examples to help the TAs get started is useful. I found that the TAs did use the suggested actions quite a bit, and both TAs seem to be saying, and I have quotes here, that they like this feature of the prototype. And also, the second finding is that being forced to rate oneself provides a good avenue for mini reflection. So we have here 1 TA, the scores are generally pretty high. And when I interviewed the TA, they said that giving themselves a rating made them more conscious of their actions for the next student. The other TA had a slightly different story to tell, so I'd like to draw your attention to student 3. The TA apparently didn't practice the strategies very well, but right afterwards, as they were filling in the form, giving themselves 3 and a 2, they said out loud, could have done better. So that was an instance where I realized that, oh, this prototype is engaging them in a mini reflection moment. And through the interview, this TA also said that the process of having to rate themselves was good at enabling a quick moment of reflection. So it seems like we can help TAs be more cognizant of their actions using short 30-second windows in between students. One limitation, a problem that I found in this prototype was that it was geared towards actions rather than strategies. Let me use an example to show you what I mean. So for this TA, this TA said that the student came in saying they didn't know how to start, and afterwards they rated themselves with a 3. And after office hours, when I interviewed the TA, I asked them, why did you rate yourself a 3 here? And they said it was because they couldn't apply the action, right? The suggested action was to begin by asking the student what they've tried. The student didn't know how to start, so the TA wasn't able to ask, well, what have you tried? Um, but if we look at the strategy overall is to explain the new concept and skills to students, refrain from using it to solve their problem, at the most demo it once, but let them try it so they gain proficiency with it. And when I interviewed the TA, that's exactly what the TA did. They just didn't use, the specific action. And this is a problem because there's no way a prototype is going to be able to suggest, a comprehensive list of all the actions you might want to take. What we really want to get at is to get TAs to be proficient at the strategy, to be able to recognize that, oh, in different scenarios, there are different actions that they can take to let students learn by doing, rather than a specific instance of, I'm going to start off the conversation by asking them what they've tried. And remember this, tree that I was talking about at the start of the presentation. I feel that a major limitation of the current prototype is that it doesn't get at the complexity of the new approach. It's not as simple as giving the TAs a list of like 10 actions here, do these. There are skills the TA has to learn to, for example, assess a student's level of understanding. Um, and this is really, the main obstacle that's stopping the TA. It's great that we can get them to practice specific actions, but we want them to build proficiency in these skills so that they can adopt the strategy approach overall of giving students just enough help. So for the next steps, I would say, we would probably want to test if the TAs can build up the skills tree. In particular, we want to see if our model of the skills, this tree that I have, is accurate in the first place. Are there things that I've missed out? Because remember, this is untested. This is based on my understanding from the latest tests. I haven't tested this model yet. We also want to find out how to scaffold the TAs in learning all these like mini skills, and also what obstacles there are currently facing them. And also probably another next step would be port it over to a tech platform, because right now what I had the TAs use was pen and paper. Um, I'm hoping that we could port it over to some kind of uh, maybe a web application, something that TAs can load on their phone, that it would provide much more functionality, perhaps like prompting them, it being connected to a database, so on. That would be really useful, and there might be more digital challenges there that are currently unexplored. Okay, so to sum it all up, the major takeaways I think are that we've developed this approach of scaffolding reflection to help TAs identify areas of misalignment. And then we can build on that reflection to help TAs adopt more effective practices. A couple of implications. After we've scaffolded reflection, then we can work on strategies and actions. And we can come back to current approaches, some of the things like TA handbooks, TA training. Maybe after the TAs have been through these, reflective process of reflection, these might start to make more sense, and we can incorporate them into the solution. That could be a possible direction. And more broadly speaking, this approach might be applicable to the larger class of problems where latent beliefs might conflict with one's goals, be it in education or some other field. And that brings me to the end of my presentation. I hope you've enjoyed it. And if this project sounds interesting to you and it's still available on DTR, I'd highly encourage you to apply. DTR is a great place to learn about doing research. Once again, thank you and have a good day.